So, hi, thanks for coming. We're going to learn on bicycles. This is my bicycle. It's going to be my instructional aid. Yeah. So, mostly, I think the scope of what I'm going to talk through is what's called an M-check. M-check, which is like a kind of mnemonic for doing like quick, regular checks as to the like fitness of your bicycle. It's called an M-check because you can trace an M across the bike to do it. So there's a little diagram with the M there. And it's basically just like a kind of way of going over all of the systems on your bike to make sure nothing is horribly out of whack. And it also kind of brings your attention to stuff that you should be studying. And we'll see how quickly it takes to get through that. If there's enough time at the end, I'm going to talk about the like regular quick maintenance that I do on my bike. That's kind of like the most important thing. That's pretty preventative. That sort of is a kind of, if you do this every couple of weeks, if you're riding your bike every day, it significantly lengthens how long the parts last. So like the idea of the air check is you start at the front of the bike and you go up, and then down. So there's 5 points. First, the front wheel, around the front wheel, then the front cockpit, so like the, this is called the headset here, and so it's the bearings around the headset, anything around your steering, and then you move down to this area, so this is called a crank, and then where the crank connects is called the bottom bracket. You can check all of that stuff, and then you head up to around the seat post and your saddle, and then from there you kind of repeat most of what you did in the front, but for the back wheel and also the back part of the drivetrain. So that's your derailleur, if you have one, and the chain and things like that. And then also, sorry, with the cockpit you check, that's where you check the brakes for tension, and then you kind of inspect them. So let's just go through it. So if you turn over on the back side, there's like a list of 5 points, and they line up with those parts of the M check. The first thing that you want to do is, so I should say also that like you can do all of this in like a bike stand, and it's a little faster, but it's totally unnecessary. And I have one at home, but I didn't bring it in because I think it's important to see that you do all this process with very few things. And it mostly just makes it so you don't have to hold your own bike up, which can be really awkward. But so for the first part, what you're going to really do is, so first you make sure that your wheel is actually secure, so you can kind of just give it a little push, and you make sure that it's in. So I've got what's called a quick release here, so I can flip it like this, sticky, and then give it a couple of turns and the wheel will come out. If you have a different kind of braking system, the brake can also block. So I've got disc brakes, which is this disc here, and so that is never going to block the wheel coming out. You have caliper or rim brakes, so like a brake with pads on the rim. Usually you have to open those up as well as flip the release. You might also, depending on your bicycle, have a nut instead of a quick release. So frequently on single speeds, there's a nut instead of a quick release, and that's usually a 15 millimeter spanner. But the sort of process is the same. You loosen it, and then the wheel comes out. As an aside, the reason why you have to unscrew it and flip it is because there's a little tab on the outer edge here that you can't really see, but you can feel it. For most like modern quick release wheels, they're sometimes called bloater tabs. So what they do is if the quick release opens, the wheel can't come out, it'll just get a little loose. Called bloater tabs because they prevent lawsuits. They're generally not that helpful. And some people who are very into bicycles will file them off. I don't recommend that. It is actually a safety feature, but I guess you could. Okay, so our wheel's secure. It's not coming off anywhere. So what we want to do is pick up the front wheel and give it a little spin. Yes.
You point to the brake release for the to open the brakes.
Ah, yeah. So it's a little bit specific depending on who makes your brakes. So, but in general, there is a switch right here. And you pick it up. I don't know whose bike this is. I apologize if anyone else's bike. Okay, great. So now the brake is open, and then you go back to like this, and it's closed again. Some bicycles, if you use brake systems made by a company called Campagnolo, don't have that. Instead, they've got a button up here by the brake lever, and you push it, and it does the same thing. And so what that does is it just expands the gap between those two brake pads by enough to get your tire through. Yeah. So we're convinced the wheel is on straight, and then what we want to do is give the wheel a little spin. And you do two things here. The first thing you do is listen. So if you've got alignment problems with your brakes or with your tires rubbing, whatever, you'll hear things. So like, this is nice, there's no noise. No noise is the best noise in this context. And then the other thing we want to do is see if the wheel runs straight, right? So if you have brake pads on rims, the easiest place to check that is the gap. So it should be like the same all the time. I don't, so we can just kind of spot it and sort of see, is there like a major wiggle? So if you've got like a dent in the rim or something, it should knock and you should see it. Depending on how bad it is, it might affect the ride. If it's mild, maybe you just put it on the list for things to sort of deal with eventually. The other thing you can check at this point is your tire pressure, so just give it a squeeze. It's the easiest way to check tire pressure actually is on the sidewall, so like this, because some of the ways that some tires are resistant to punctures make it harder to sort of feel for pressure from the top. I mean, so it's a little bit tricky to kind of like vocally instruct for like what the right tire pressure feels like. Also depends on the size of your tires, so different tires need different amounts of pressure. But you can kind of learn it over time. One of the things that I think is a first sort of purchase for at-home maintenance is a good floor pump that has a gauge on it. I have recommendations for brands. You can get one for 30 to 40 pounds, and it's a really good thing to do. Rolling on under-inflated tires makes your life generally miserable, so you'll puncture more often, and the ride's not as nice. So like in practice, you kind of need to put a little bit of air in your tires, maybe once a week even. So like it's something that's just a lot easier to do if you've got a good pump coming. And I think once you have a gauge, so you can kind of you can map the feel to how the tire is. These are at about 85 psi, I think. If anyone wants to like squeeze them at some point and like kind of map that, but like I don't know how useful that's going to be for your own tires on your own bike. And then so that's kind of what we want to do here. If you have permanently installed mudguards like I do, you also want to check for clearance on the mudguard the same way as everything else. Again, that's easiest done with sound because if they're touching, you hear it. And then make any adjustments that you might need to make. So then we move up to the hub. So to check, so what you want to do to check the hub is a little bit exciting. So actually, the easiest way to do this is to straddle the bike, and then you kind of squeeze the wheel in your feet right here, and you give it a wiggle like this. So what you're trying to do is check and see if the hub, which is here, has any play in the bearings. So the way that a bike wheel works is that you've got a whole bunch of balls in a little track. So those are ball bearings in a ball bearing race, it's called. They're held in place in the sort of top and the bottom in a way that's like tightened just so. And over time those can loosen, and then the bearings can kind of move around. So instead of just going in a circle and everything rolls nicely, they can move up and down a bit, and that makes them wear out way faster. And it also makes your bike handle poorly. And so those are things that can, if caught early, be quite easy and cheap to deal with. You just kind of tighten stuff up. You can shop and tighten stuff up, you don't have the right spanners. But if you let it go, it can basically destroy your powder. So like caught early, it's like 10-minute repair with the correct tools and no part swapping. And if you leave it, then your hub has to be replaced. So you can check that, and if it wiggles a little bit, it's probably fine. You want to keep an eye on it. And if it wiggles much more than a millimeter laterally, then it's something that you want to either take out yourself or bring to a shop and point out. Does that make sense? Yeah? This is something I would highly recommend if we have time and you have a bike here, you can sort of try it on your own bike as well. Because it's quite... Thing about the front wheel. So we move up to the cockpit. So here you want to check that the steering wheel moves smoothly, steering bars move smoothly. So there's another set of bearings in a race at the bottom and the top of the headset. And what can happen to these, so you can have the same kind of tension problems that you get in the hub, but because steering, you tend to just have your bars forward all the time, the bearings can kind of make little grooves for themselves. And so then you get what can frequently be referred to as indexed steering, where basically, because the balls have sort of grounded little homes for themselves, everything clicks. And so you'll feel that really easily. And if you get any kind of like tick, tick, tick as you move across, it means that your headset needs to get replaced, which is like an advanced repair that I can talk about in a different session. But like, if you sort of feel that, it's a good sign that you need to probably take your bike somewhere and get some assistance on that. And again, that's the sort of thing where like the longer you leave it, the more stuff it can wreck. So like if you sense that, it's a good sign that you need to get things checked out. Okay, so if everything rotates smoothly here, the other thing you actually want to check for is that none of the cables have like positioned themselves in a new and exciting way that's causing trouble. So it's important that when you steer, you can go all the way this way and nothing blocks except your top tube, and you can go all the way this way and you get the same thing, right? In general, these cables ought to kind of stay where they're put and like they shouldn't move around too much, but it's a good thing to sort of check when you're sort of going through this process. So then what you want to do is sort of check that all of the bolts are tight, and that mostly is just sort of making sure nothing wiggles inappropriately, and also kind of just check for nominal wear and tear. Are there anything sort of look worn out in the handlebars? And this is the same process really if you have different sorts of handlebars, right? So this whole mechanism is going to be the same on basically all bikes, and it's just kind of a matter of shape. And then when you want to look at the shifters and the brakes. So on a road bike like this one, those are the same piece. So this is the brake, this is the brake, and then I shift. That's one way, that's the other way, that's one way, that's the other way. Different systems are a little different, and they might be separate. So if you have flat handlebars, you might have like click shifters that are one piece, and the brake lever that's a separate piece. But you want to check that all of that works. So the easiest way to check your brakes, you just want to squeeze each one. Oh, that clicks because it's worn out. My front brake is worn out. It has a warning click. That's weird. It's particular to my bike. So you give it a squeeze. So if you look at the back brake, which is actually acting appropriately, what you want to see in your brake is that you feel tension about a third of the way through. You can fully squeeze it, and there's another third left. So like that's kind of the ideal alignment. So you want to kind of just check that, and then you want to test that you can squeeze both brakes, and then your bike doesn't move. So the brakes are nominally working. If they're a little loose, there are what are called barrel adjusters. So they can be in various places. Depending on the levers you have, they might be next to the lever. They're also frequently next to the brake. So you see there's a piece right here on mine that I can twist like this. And what that does is it moves the inner cable either closer or further away from the brake. Mm-hmm. So if your brakes aren't sort of tense a third and fully tight another third, you can adjust that tension using the barrel adjuster if it's just kind of a little bit squishy. The other thing to check is how worn out your pads are. So if you have a caliper brakes like this, those pads will wear out as you use them, right? So you're sort of moving the pad next to a bit of metal on the brake, and so they wear out over time. And as they wear out, you get more space. So your brakes are going to become loose as you wear through them. And so if it's just kind of, you replaced your brakes a couple of months ago or a year ago, and they're quite worn out, you can usually pick up that slack with a couple turns of the barrel adjuster, and then your brakes will be as responsive as when the pads were installed. If the brakes are fully worn out, again, either you need to replace them yourself, which is a little beyond scope here, or it's a good sign that you need to do sort of like a little bit more than once a year kind of maintenance and take it somewhere if that's what you want to do. Okay, so we've got the brakes set up, we've got this set up. So then we're going to go down to the bottom bracket. So the easiest way to check that your bottom bracket works, as I think it says on this list, is to have a little ride around and make sure that everything is smooth. I'm going to skip that for the sake of instruction, but basically what you want to check for is that your pedals sort of feel smooth the whole way around. So if I pick up the bike, and see this. So again, you're listening and you're feeling when you pedal. So you're looking for any kind of like knocks or uneven feedback when you pedal around. And then you're hearing, is everything mostly quiet? And so if things don't feel smooth, it's a symptom that the bottom bracket, which is this guy down here, is having some wear. So again, the bottom bracket is another one of these bearing systems that are in the bike. So you have the same kind of idea. The bunch of balls in a race, and if that tension is off, or if they're worn out, you can get play, and things will wiggle a bit, and that'll you should feel that if you're sort of just paying attention. Bottom brackets, like headsets, one of the more complicated things you can do, so probably going to need to take it to a shop if it feels like it's loose. It's the sort of thing that if you do the once a year, highest of the packages of maintenance, they should take apart and check at the shop. And then you can get rubbing things as well, and then there's a lot of different places that can cause that, so it depends along the specifics as to what might be going on. If you've got rubbing, it may be around the wheel, in which case we'll sort of look at that in a little while. You can also have problems that can show up in this process with your derailleur systems. So if we take a look, so on a bike with gears, most bikes with gears anyway, you've got two different shifting places. So you've got the front derailleur, which is this one, and you've got the rear derailleur, which is this one. And so front derailleur has two positions, or sometimes three, and you usually, in most setups, shift it on the left side, and then the rear derailleur is usually on the right. I guess there can be some exotic setups where that's not true, but generally that's the way it works. So you shift the front derailleur, it should go like that, and then the pedal, let it goes. And what we want to do, so if we're doing this as a ride test, we'd shift to either the 2 or 3 places you can shift to, and then you want to listen again. And so you want to make sure it's not rubbing in any of its positions, and you can shift back up. And you want to make sure that it, in fact, actually shifts as well. So thankfully it's working. And the way that, so the principal way that you can adjust the front derailleur is 2 places. So there's a cable to the top of it here, and there'll be a barrel adjuster, just like with the brakes, somewhere in the system. It's usually where the cable goes into the frame. Sometimes on my second example right here, you have them in the cables as well. And they do the same thing as with the brakes, so they adjust how much tension is on the line. So if you have trouble moving between the gears, so if it sticks in the little ring and won't push up all the way, then there's not enough tension on the cable, which is a pretty common problem that happens over time. So you can give maybe a half turn or a whole turn to the barrel adjuster, and that can sort that out. The other thing that can happen with front derailleurs, especially, is if the derailleur is moving out too much or not enough, that can be addressed with what are called the limit screws. So on my bike, they're on top. It varies a little bit depending on how your front derailleur is built. But so there's 2 little screws right here, and it varies a little bit depending on the system. For this one, this screw controls how far out it goes, and the inside screw controls how far in it goes. On a lot of front derailleurs, you can actually see the physical mechanism, so if you just push directly on the derailleur, you can see which screw is physically blocking it from moving any further. So it's a very simple system. You move the screw down, and the cage in the derailleur just literally cannot go any further because it's physically blocked. You have a similar system in the rear derailleur that does a slightly different job. So if you have a derailleur that's moving out too far, you can take a small Phillips screwdriver and turn. So if you turn it clockwise, it will put the screw out more, so you get more blocking. So it will reduce the amount of distance you can go. The other direction makes it increase. So if you are having trouble shifting into a gear on the front, you want to give it a little more room. And if you are shifting very easily, but also a little too easily and your chain is coming off, which is a thing that can happen, then you can sort of reduce the tread. And in general, you don't need to be too shy. You can sort of give this a good couple of turns. And if you overcorrect, it's usually quite obvious, and you can sort of work it out. It's not too much trouble. When you might be looking for gearing, it's twofold. The first is chain tension. So do you see how there's a little bit of slack here?
So it's not good, this one? No.
It's kind of okay. It's not too bad. I've seen worse. But that's the first thing is chain tension. So on a many-geared bike, part of what the rear derailleur does is it's just got a spring in it that takes up any slack in the chain, at least up to a point. And so as you use a chain, the they call it stretch, but the metal doesn't actually stretch. What happens is that all the parts kind of settle in, and so it gets longer in practice. And so a bike that has a chain that kind of slacks a bit is not as efficient.
Mm-hmm. So I should get it sorted a little bit.
Well, I mean, I can show you how to do it in a little while.
Okay.
I don't have the tool. So on a single-speed bicycle, the back here is just a slot. And so the easiest way to control the chain tension is you undo the rear wheel, and you pull it back, and you tighten it in a new spot.
Fantastic.
So your chain is a little slack where it is, but in a way that you can pick up by just moving the rear wheel back.
Cool.
In general, chains wear out, and you probably want to replace them maybe every 3,000 to 5,000 kilometers of riding. On a single-speed bicycle, because the chain doesn't move around as much, you can get away with a longer use, as long as you pick up that tension.
Mm-hmm.
So, leaving it loose like this will wear it out faster. And yeah, that's basically it. So the components on this bike are a little bit different to keep your chain from moving around too much. So the teeth on the sprocket and on the chain ring will be taller, and the chain itself is a little wider than on a bike with gears. I've mostly been ignoring this because generally there's less to do on a bike with fewer things.
Yeah.
And the brake system's the same. Right?
Yeah.
But yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so this is like front derailleur and kind of how things are working in terms of your pedals, all of this. So then we're going to move up. We're going to talk about the saddle a little bit. So on basically every bicycle, you've got a seat post, which is a separate bit of metal that goes into a seat tube via either a separate clamp or a screw that's built into the frame that controls the tension. There's a few bicycles that you'll find, especially sort of higher-end road bikes, that actually have what's called a seat mast. So instead of a post that goes in, you've got a very small clamp for a saddle on top that just goes on top, and if you want to adjust the height, you actually have to cut the frame. None of these bikes are fancy enough for that sort of contraption. You have to spend a few $1,000s to see that sort of feature. It's done for weight savings. If anyone's interested, it's a lot of fuss to save like 10 grams on a bicycle. So what you want to check here is that the saddle itself is not loose. So the easiest way to do this is to get on the bike and ride it. You can also just sort of check for wiggles, right? So that's not moving. So on this bike, which is quite typical, there's one bolt right here that controls how tight the saddle rails are. And that's, on this bike, it's a 6mm bolt, which is pretty typical. It'll usually, if you have a sort of set of Allen keys, it'll be sort of in the middle sizes. The other thing is to make sure that the saddle itself is straight, so you can do that by eye, sort of check and make sure that the nose is pointing that way, not that way or that way. And if it's out of alignment, or if it's too high or too low, then you adjust that here. So there's another Allen key here on this bike. Again, like different bikes vary a little bit, but the sort of principle is the same. There's going to be usually just one bolt, occasionally two. It'll be here, loosen it a bit, and you should be able to move the seat post up and down. One of the reasons why it's important actually to loosen this, move your seat post up and down, and put it back where it goes on a regular basis is a really common thing that happens to bicycles, is that the seat post will seize inside the seat tube. Especially riding, as you all probably get to, in a lot of rain. Basically, so you've got either metal on metal or metal and carbon in fancier carbon bikes. And both of those things, when you introduce a bunch of water in, can either rust or oxidize, in the case of like if you have aluminum and carbon sitting next to each other. And that oxidization, which is rust in the metal system, will sit inside and build up. I have had this happen to a bicycle. It's really easy to do if you just kind of leave your bike alone for 6 months. And like right in the rain, it can totally happen. And so the easiest way to deal with this in advance is like maybe once every 2 or 3 months, to undo the bolt here, take your seat post out, give it a wipe down, put a little bit of grease, bicycle grease, on the post, and then put it back in where it goes. And that will prevent a whole lot of pain and annoyance. Because dealing with the seat post, depending on how bad it is, can involve like a vice grip and some solvent on the sort of easier end, And on the harder end, you basically have to drill out your seat post and like physically remove it with quite a lot of effort. I mean, if you're the only person who's ever going to ride the bike ever again and you're happy with where it is, maybe it's okay if it sees because you're not going to move it again. If you want to sell your bike, though, this is going to be something that will go away. And in general, it's just good to make sure that you can actually move the seat post out of the way. Right. So that's kind of there. Does anyone have any questions with the seat area?
The perfect positioning? Because I've heard things like your leg should be stretched, it shouldn't be stretched.
Yeah, okay. So, thanks. That was the thing I was going to talk about. So, there's a couple of things. Some of them are quite easy to see without help, and some of them require a little bit of assistance or a mirror. The first thing is that what you should be able to do is pedal comfortably without your hips rocking back and forth. So you want to sort of keep in the same place on the saddle, so you shouldn't need to stretch, basically. And the easiest way to feel that if it's just a little bit too high is that your hips may sort of rock a bit. So like if it's like a few millimeters too high, you'll sort of shift just a little bit back and forth, and you shouldn't ever be doing that, right? You should be sort of firm. And the easiest way to sort of do that, show you, if you get on the bike, sit all the way at the bottom, you should be able to sort of just touch your heel on the pedal, and that's a pretty good like rule of thumb for getting the sizing right. And really what you're looking for is a slight bend, so like about like this, was that about sort of 70 degrees or so, when the pedal axle is underneath the ball of your foot, plus or minus. And that gets you pretty close, so like if you want to really dial it in, it varies person to person because everyone's knees are a bit different. So like my knees actually swing out a little bit when I pedal. Some people they swing in a little, some people are sort of straight up and down, and that can affect how much bend you need at the bottom. So like, if you sort of mess around with things yourself and still have trouble, getting a bike fit is a really good thing to do, especially if you spend a lot of time on a bicycle continuously. So if you're cycling for 2 or 3 hours continuously, because like small fit problems can build up. If you just have short commutes, you can actually be a little bit off, and it's probably okay as long as it's comfortable. But yeah, like rule of thumb is like make sure your hips aren't swinging and that your heel is sort of just touching. It's all the way down. Any other questions before we move on to the rear? Okay. Same thing we did in front of you. So first thing we're going to pick it up and give it a spin. So a couple of things to talk about with that spin. The first is, of course, we're listening like we did before. Again, checking for rubbing, whatever. With the rear wheel, we can't ignore the drivetrain like we got to with the front wheel. So any bike with gears has what's called a freewheel mechanism. So that means that if I go like this, and I swing it this way, the pedals don't move. If I swing it this way, the pedals come along for the ride. Similarly, if I grab a pedal and I pedal forward, the wheel moves, and if I pedal backwards, nothing happens except the pedal moves, and I get a like pleasing ratchet noise. So the mechanism that makes that happen is called freewheel, and it's basically like a ratchet. So there's a bunch of teeth that go one way, and then an interface to those teeth, so you can move in one direction and you can't move in the other. And so that lets the wheel spin, and you can coast. The other thing that happens is fixed wheels, so fixed gears, fix these annoying people who are cycling cats, etc. Or like track bikes. Track bikes are the like sort of less of a scene, like sort of sensible and common use for a fixed wheel bicycle, which we'll talk about a little later if anyone's interested. But on a fixed wheel bike, you move the wheel and the pedals move, and you move the pedals and the wheel moves regardless of direction. So sometimes people talk about this as meaning you definitely don't have a brake. So you can always put a brake on a fixed wheel. You could have both. But a fixed wheel itself is a braking system, but instead of pads on a rim, you have cartilage underneath to wear through. So like by not pedaling as quickly as your wheel is moving, you end up resisting the wheel moving forward, which acts just like a brake. And actually it's a very good brake, but only on your rear wheel. So like it's in many ways a better brake in terms of the kind of efficiency that you can get than a rim brake or a disc brake. At the price of wearing the cartilage on your knees again, which is, well, you make your own decision. And also, the bigger problem actually with riding a fixed gear bike with a fixed gear as the only braking system is that on a bicycle, 60 to 70% of the braking force comes from your front wheel, And if you don't have any brake on the front, then you've lost all of that. So like sometimes when you see people riding fixed that are being sensible about it, they'll have a front brake and nothing on the back. And that's because the fixed wheel itself is acting as their rear brake, and the front brake they've got a normal front braking system. So that's free wheels. So again, you want to, for just about any bicycle, you should be able to hear the ratchet work. So like, pick this up. So you can hear that's the ratchet in my free wheel. And it should be a sort of steady clicking noise. Everyone's will sound a bit different because it depends on the manufacturer and whatever, but like understanding what yours sounds like is good, and what you want to sort of hear for is change, because those ratchet systems can either like get seized up over if you sort of take on a long knock. They can also wear out over time, and usually that will surface as a significant change in the noise they make. Is the sort of easiest way to check that. Yeah, and then the rest of it is just sort of the same kind of checking you want to do for the front wheel. Like, is it rubbing on things? Do the brakes seem good? Is the wheel itself firm in? We can similarly, I'm going to skip this because it will involve getting a fair amount of grease on my hands to make it safe for the in, but you can remove this wheel basically the same way that we did before. So there's a quick release lever right over here. You flip it out, you unscrew it, and you can knock the wheel out. On a bicycle with gears, such as this one, the rear derailleur will effectively block the wheel from coming out. So you have to basically push it away with your hand, and then the wheel will come out. Also, if you're going to remove the wheel in a sort of intentional way, as opposed to I just had a puncture on the roadway, the first thing you want to do is shift all the way to the smallest gear in the back, and all the way to the smallest gear in the front. And the reason why you want to do this is because of that thing we talked about earlier with Marco's bike, chain tension. So when you're in the smallest ring in the front and the smallest ring in the back, which is not where you should ride generally because these two chains are a bit too diagonal, but what you've done is taken the chain and put the most slack on it possible because you've got the smallest of both rings. And so you can see that the derailleur is now all the way back, whereas before when I started, this lower pulley was sort of there. And so that makes it much easier to move everything out of the way when you pull the wheel. I'm still not going to do it because it's just, I don't think it's especially necessary right now. But so in this position, you need to work very little to get the bike away, or take the wheel away from the chain when you pull the wheel out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the rear derailleur. Well, first of all, is there with so far? Yeah, make sense. So the rear derailleur is a little bit more complicated as a mechanism, but actually simpler to adjust than the front derailleur. So what you have in the rear derailleur is a series of springs and a kind of parallelogram that controls those springs, and you can push it back with your hands. So like if I go like this, it'll click through, and that's doing the work that the cable would normally do anyway. And if you ever find yourself building a bicycle or without a chain on the bike, one of the easiest ways to sort of check that the derailleur works as you expect is to push it from the outermost position to the innermost position when you don't have a chain on the bike. That's quite easy to do. But so anyway, so by pulling or pushing this cable here, you control where the derailleur sits. And then the springs that are attached to these pulleys pick up the slack on the chain based on what size ring you're on. So because all of these cogs are different sizes, the chain will have more or less slack on it. And so part of what those pulleys do is make sure that the chain tension is consistent regardless of what gear you're in. So to check that that's in a sensible place, we're just going to move through the gears. Again, I would suggest that you do this by sort of riding somewhere that doesn't have much traffic and just sort of click through the gears. I will show you quickly that we can sort of click. Some bikes you have to move one at a time. Some bikes, like this one, you can move 2 or 3 at a time. You can probably work that out on your own bike. So we're just going to move through everything and make sure that it's picking up and that it's shifting cleanly and not skipping gears. Just one more. And the other thing that we want to do is listen for sort of rubs and clicks. So when you have a root derailleur, there's something called gear indexing, and so that means that you click a button and it shifts exactly enough for one gear, not too much, not too little. And if that indexing isn't quite set up correctly, then you get sort of the chain is kind of in between, and that'll usually be like sort of clicking or rubbing, where it's trying to move from one place to the other because there's stress on the chain. And the best way to deal with that is with the barrel adjuster. If you've detected a theme, it's because there is one. So on the rear derailleur, the barrel adjuster will always be attached to the derailleur here. Sometimes there's another one as well. So on some bikes, not this one, but some bikes will have one up here where the cable meets the frame, and sometimes around the lever, again, depending on the system. On this bike, there's only the one here. Generally, for this work, I find that the one next to the derailleur is the easiest one to use as well, because you can actually see what's happening. So again, if we go this way, then it pushes the cable out a little bit, and if we go this way, anti-clockwise, for those who can't actually see my fingers, sorry, it'll pull the cable out. And that cable tension is the primary thing that's responsible for the indexing. So what typically can happen is you get your bike set up and you build it yourself, and you sort of get the indexing set just so, and over time, through stretch, although again it's not actually stretching, it's the metal kind of settles in, but it ends up effectively being longer, the cable from your lever to your derailleur physically gets a bit longer, and so that puts a little bit less tension on the line than you have to set up, and so that can make your gears not quite be indexed correctly, and the solution to that is to just turn your derailleur a half or a whole click, and that'll pick up that tension, and then things should work again. So if we shift down a bit, so right now, when I pedal, there's no real noise, and you can visually inspect, which is the easiest way to see this. So if you come behind your bike, and what you want to see is everything in a straight line. So let me turn. So and I encourage you to do this with your bikes as well. So those two pulleys and the chain make a straight line to the gear that they're sitting on. And that's like a really good way to visually see what will then not make any noise when you pedal. So if, I'm going to throw my index out and I'm teaching. So if I turn this about four rotations, let's see if you can see it. Yeah, so if you look now, the bottom pulley especially is nowhere near in alignment with the gear it's on. And when I pedal, it's not super really switched. Yeah, so it totally just shifted gears without clicking because I pulled enough tension out of that. And so
if you have a bike that bikes that like up either extreme of the chainsaw, like it just won't stay in gear, keep dropping down. Is that because like the thing won't shift over far enough?
Yeah, so it usually means that, so it depends on which side. There's either not enough tension on the cable or too much. And so typically it's because the cable's too loose.
Yeah.
So on the rear,
where it won't stay in the biggest ring.
right. So on the natural state of the springs in the rear derailleur is all the way out this way. So that's the littlest gear, which is the hardest to pedal. And so yeah, if you have trouble getting to the bigger rings in the back, it's almost certainly because the cable doesn't have enough tension. So to fix this, we will just twist this back the other way until it looks good. Took off. Get the pedal off. And that sounds good. And that's it. If you're setting up your rear derailleur from scratch, because you're going on a bicycle building adventure or something like this, there are 3 screws that are relevant that I almost hesitate to mention in this sort of context because it's a very common mistake to think that it's a thing that needs adjusting. But we'll talk about them for a second anyway because they're here. So they're the same limit screws in the front derailleur, but in contrast to the front derailleur, you almost never need to deal with them if you're just doing small bits of maintenance. So these are the high and the low limit screws. which in a way that's analogous to the front, control how far out and how far in they go. The difference is that because of the particulars of the way that it works, once your derailleur is set up for the first time for your bike, it shouldn't ever need to get touched. The only difference is that if you've had an incident of some sort, typically an accident would be the sort of incident, but sometimes you can have some technical problems where your chain gets jammed and it causes the same problem, where either the derailleur itself or the what's called derailleur hanger, which is this bit here where the derailleur is attached, gets bent. The way that you can get yourself home without needing to call the saddest cab is by adjusting those screws and basically forcing your derailleur into a position that makes your bike rideable, where it's been bent. And aside from that kind of like roadside emergency repair situation, you shouldn't ever need to touch those once they're set up correctly. The other screw back here is called the B screw, which on this derailleur is right here. Sometimes on some other, so this is a Shimano drivetrain, and Shimano always has the screw right here. So do most of the other companies. Campagnolo is weird and puts it in a different spot. So the same screw on a Campagnolo drives there. But what that does is it affects the average angle that the derailleur sits at. And again, that's the thing that once it's set correctly, you shouldn't ever need to touch. So if you had a bike put together by a good shop, and that's sort of how it came to you, you should never need to mess with that. But basically what that controls is making sure that your pulleys are as close to the gears as possible without ever touching them. So it affects, in particular, the overall angle that the derailleur sits at. So it's a screw that pushes the derailleur up a bit. And so because of the varying tension, it's kind of this like compromised screw, and you basically want to set it so things are close, but not too close, because you don't ever want those pulleys to touch the gears. Again, though, if your bike is set up correctly, that should be a set up once and forget about it kind of screw. Yeah.
So I just wanted to add this. So I had a problem with my front derailleur recently, where like about halfway through on the small chainring, it was starting to like rub, and it turns out that I've had this bike for years, and we didn't need to know this, that there's actually like an intermediate shift on the front derailleur.
Yeah, that's true.
So if you find it rubbing when you're going up, that actually you can kind of like nudge the shift rather than press it to get onto the big chainring, and it will like not rub again, and then you do it again.
Yeah. So when you're checking, I will. So for everyone, even though there's only 2 gears, there's actually multiple click points on most front derailleurs. This does vary a bit, so some of them only have the number of gears, but nearly all, especially more modern systems, will have. So on this bike, I think there's 3. On my other bike, I've got actually 6 points. It's very silly and kind of unnecessary, frankly. But so the point of that is that you can shift over, and then effectively what you can do is overshift. So like right now, this front derailleur is sort of uncomfortably out, but that makes the shift better. So it like, you see this described as like a more positive shift. I don't understand why they use that word, but like basically the idea is that it's like a firm and quick shift from one chainring to the other. So you do this, and then it comes up really quickly on the wheel, and that's great. But then it can rub. So I'm kind of in the middle, and this bike is set up to avoid this problem because of the way I tend to ride it. But frequently what can happen is that like where the front derailleur is right now is kind of okay, but if I shift all the way to the hardest gear in the back, because the chain moves like this as you do that, it might not have rubbed in the middle, but it might rub then. Then you can sort of do one further shift, and then it'll push out and you can see it. It just moves like sort of a fraction of a millimeter out, and then you click it in, and then it doesn't shift it the whole way, but it moves just a little bit. That's called trim, if you want to hear the jargon. And that's basically our M check, and we're nearly out of time. So I will, if anyone have any questions about actually really any of this, what we've covered, etc. No? Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's it.